Welcome to the FF Perspective, your fantasy football group chat only slightly more appropriate. Mere days after the 2023 NFL Draft wrapped and Dynasty rookie drafts are commencing, it's best to get some perspective. And to do so, I am joined by fellow degenerates Tyler Daly and Jacob Ridgway. Fellas, and Tyler, I'll start with you. How are you doing?
Doing great. Excited to break down these rookies. Jacob and I watched the draft together. I think we have a nice little tradition of that going. I was trying to recall earlier tonight. I don't know how many years we have running, but I think it's at least 3 or 4 now. So excited to, I think I survived until the Commanders pick went off the board, and then I had to exit stage left to go home and pass out. But excited to get everybody's takes and break this stuff down.
Absolutely. And Jake, how about yourself?
I'm ready to rumble, Chua, and I will start by telling you that Jaden Reed from Michigan State averaged 3 fewer yards per catch and had 2 fewer touchdowns than did the wide receiver number 1 for Michigan State, and he was the second-round pick of the Green Bay Packers. I'm out.
I think that wraps the episode. It's been a good minute, 15 seconds. We're good to go. No, I like we're starting with a stat, and hopefully I'm not going to be bringing the mood down too much doing a keep trade cut with day 3 darts, as there's a couple that might be interesting and a couple we don't give a rip about. But I'll go ahead and throw up 3 names at each position: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. And you guys let me know who you would keep, trade, and cut. So, Tyler, we'll start with you at the quarterbacks. We've got the infamous Jake Haener going to the Saints. We've got the pretty wasted Stetson Bennett going to the Rams. And we've got the Jaren Hall going to the Vikings. What do you got here?
I'm definitely gonna cut Stetson Bennett. Like, hard pass. I mean, for a moment there, in Kirby Smart's post-game presser at the national championship, he used probably a solid 90 to 120 seconds to stump for Stetson Bennett getting drafted. But what else is his coach going to say? The guy was just riding a high off of his second national championship and all the success that he's had there. But I mean, we're talking about like a 5'10" quarterback who's going to be 26 in the near future. I think the prop on him getting drafted, him not getting drafted was juiced at like minus 145. He ended up going in the 4th round, I think. Mm-hmm. Is it the 4th or the 5th? Yeah, so 4th round. Yeah. Horrible draft pick by the Rams. So he's my immediate cut. I think I would keep Haener and probably trade Hall. I think that would be my ranking, just because I think Haener might have a little bit of it's all speculative, of course, but I think he might have a little bit of a better path to quicker playing time. Whereas, who knows in Minnesota, what's going to happen with Kirk Cousins if he's going to get extended or whatever. I don't know if they're going to want to break up that him and Justin Jefferson type connection. So I'd rather side with Haener in New Orleans than Hall in Minnesota.
That's fair, Jake. And what are you thinking out of these 3?
Yeah, I will tell you that I will keep Stetson. I think there's a little bit of moxie there, some charisma there that I think Sean McVay might like. I will trade Jake Haener as much as I like the Derek Carr, Fresno State connection in New Orleans. I think that's a great landing spot, but I do think that there's a place for Jake Haener in the league at 6'1". And I'm going to cut Jaren Hall, and I'm not going to think twice about that. This is a guy that's it's been on a mission for 2 years, and he's 25 years old, and he looked like an abomination at the Senior Bowl. So no thanks.
Yeah, Jaren Hall, that's funny. It's not the same player by any means, but Kellen Mond getting drafted by the Vikings, who is now already on a different team, and them saying, he might threaten Kirk Cousins. And I don't really know that Jaren Hall has any better of a shot, but even though with Kirk Cousins, I know they did not give him an extension after this year as of now, although they could wait till the end of the season and give him another 2 years fully guaranteed again. But all right, well, maybe a position that's a little more exciting, although I don't know if the players are. So running back, we've got Eric Gray going to the Giants. We've got Drop a Deuce Vaughn going to the Cowboys. And we've got the young stud Zach Evans going to the Rams. So, Jake, what do you got here for these running backs?
Yeah, I think, as I'm writing these names down, and I know you got it on the screen, but I want to think this out for just a second. And I'm going to keep Deuce Vaughn. Deuce is always on the loose. I'm obviously a a Cowboys fan, for better or for worse, take it or leave it. And that was a really cool story to see his father got to give him the phone call. So it's a very wholesome story. And so I'm going to keep Deuce Vaughn, even though he's 5'5". And, that kind of gives you Jared Patterson vibes from the Washington Commandos from a couple of years ago. You've got to be able to play special teams if you're going to be the third or fourth back. And suspect that somebody 5'5" can. I'm going to trade Eric Gray. I think there's probably, again, another spot for him in the league. He played well at Oklahoma. Again, an older prospect at 24 years old later this year. So don't see that a lot in running backs, but with the COVID year, you do see it. And then I'm going to cut Zach Evans, the former number 1 overall recruit going into college at TCU, running back recruit, I should say. Ended up transferring to Ole Miss and really was never the starter at either joint. So I think I'm out, even with the soft landing with the Rams.
Yeah, and you mentioned Jarrett Patterson vibes. Is that a compliment or a diss? Because Jarrett Patterson's a stud.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Tyler, what do you think about these running backs?
The immediate impression that I have is like these are the three guys, like for the degenerates out there, and I'm not saying that I'm seeing that more as a compliment than as than an insult. But these are the guys that, like, if you play preseason DFS, you're like crunching the numbers to see who has the most carries next year, like leading into the week 3 preseason game between, Dallas and LA. How many quarters is Deuce Vaughn going to play versus Zach Evans? So I will actually keep Zach Evans. The guy is a head case. As you guys both know, I follow college football recruiting quite a bit. He was committed to several different schools throughout the process, ended up landing at TCU. I believe the program's only 5-star commit in the history of their football program. Things didn't work out there, both with injury and just who knows what was going on behind the scenes. Like Jake referenced, he goes to Ole Miss and then ends up losing out his job to future probably first or second round pick Judkins, which is an awesome name, but also a stud running back. So I don't think there's any shame necessarily in that. And I just think that there's a lot of uncertainty in the LA backfield. So I'm going to keep Zach Evans. I will trade Deuce Vaughn. I do think there's some opportunity there just because they picked up Ronald Jones and then like a bunch of dudes off the street, like that sound like they played for Northside High School last year. And then I will actually cut Eric Gray. He's just one-dimensional to me, so we'll see if he can make the roster. Pretty much is primarily a pass catcher, and like Jake referenced, he's also on the older end of the spectrum.
I'm already getting very excited for these late round guys. Just hearing the stout confidence with you guys. But I think this wide receiver group might turn some heads a little bit. So Tyler, we're starting off with your namesake, Tyler Scott, going to the Bears. Keishon Butte, just really solid guy, going to the Patriots. And A.T. Perry, going to the Saints, a favorite of mine. So what do you got to keep trade cut here?
Definitely going to have to keep my guy Tyler Scott for obvious reasons. Plus, I think out of these three, there's opportunity for all these guys, but who has the best or most promising quarterback out of the group? I'm gonna side with the guy who's paired up with what appears to be an upswing in Justin Fields' career. Hopefully, that it continues to go in that direction. I will trade A.T. Perry, just kind of middle of the road prospect. Didn't get the capital that I think would warrant you being have any level of excitement about him. And then I got to cut Butte. Just the arrow's been pointing down on that dude for so long. We went from thinking probably 18 months ago that he was potentially like definitely a top 5 pick at their position. Some people probably had him at their number 1 at the wide receiver position, like way too early type projections. And whether it's just off the field issues or just lack of effort, lack of production, it'll be pretty shocking to me if he turns it around.
Yeah. And Jake, what do we got here?
I'm going to keep Keishon Butte. Obviously, it's holistically on the landing place in New England. Who's their number 1? They've got 2 strong tight ends in Hunter Henry and Gesicki that just came over from the Dolphins, but and maybe they're going back to the Gronk and Aaron Hernandez days. But really not a strong wide receiver in that group. So, I will take the incredibly high risk, potentially some reward there. And obviously he had a really poor combine. There's been some off the field questions that we won't get into here. But I'm going to keep him because of the landing place and thinking that, he's got a pretty strong or a pretty high, it's not a floor, but I think it's a pretty high ceiling if it's the right place, right time for him. I mean, on a scale of 1 to 10, what's he going to hit? A 2, but I'm willing to keep that. And then really quickly, I'm going to trade Tyler Scott, in Chicago. Now that went from an empty wide receiver room to now having Chase Claypool, who came over for pick 32 in the NFL draft this past year. Also, you have the much appreciated and much adored DJ Moore from Charlotte now in that wide receiver corps. And you also have, of course, our guy from Tulane, what was it, 5th round pick a couple of years ago. He was supposed to be the number 1, wasn't great.
Darnell Mooney.
Thank you.
Love that guy.
So, you're talking he could be wide receiver 4 there, even though, certainly I think Tyler Scott has some potential there. And he was a highly regarded pick in terms of people like Mel Kiper, Daniel Jeremiah, where they had him mocked. It was really in the 2nd round. And he ended up going in the 4th. So I think that he slipped a little bit. And then I'm going to cut A.T. Perry. And even though he's got the really strong size at 6'3", and not a lot of receivers had that size this year, but 24 years old, older prospect, and I don't think he can get off the line quite like he might need to get open in the league. But again, not the worst landing spot for him in New Orleans when you're talking about a 30-year-old Michael Thomas on a 1-year prove-it type deal, and then you've got your number 1 in Chris Olave. But other than that, there's room for opportunity.
Yeah, in terms of A.T. Perry, I'd seen some comps to neither of these are great necessarily, but I think they make sense, like Tyrell Williams or Hakeem Butler, who the latter of which has actually transitioned into a tight end and not really a successful one at that, but I think that's probably fair. Jumping over the tight ends, I'm not excited about these names. Some of the landing spots are good, and I know, Tyler, I think you'll like one of these as he is a Titan. So first one we have is Josh Whyle going to the Titans. The second one we got Payne Durham going to the Bucks. And then Zach, I'll pronounce it correctly and not try to be funny, Kuntz going to the Jets. I forgot who I left off at. Who's going first? I don't remember.
Jake.
It's Jake.
Yeah, what you got?
All right, I'm going to keep Payne Durham. Obviously, the only other athlete I know that's named Payne is Payne Stewart, and that's awesome. He had a really strong career alongside Charlie Jones and Aiden O'Connell at Purdue. So I'm going to keep him, and really they've only I think that the tight end room, much to your chagrin, Chew, might be wide open in Tampa Bay. So I'm going to go with Payne to keep and then trade Josh Whyle. I thought that was a decent landing place with Shig still there. But I think the key I want to go to is Zach Kuntz. Former Old Dominion player, he's 6'7", and he absolutely crushed the combine. I think they were saying that he was like in every single drill at the combine. I think he finished like on a scale of whatever the scale they call it, a 10 out of 10. And that's pretty impressive. But, there's a lot of combine freaks, and I don't necessarily know that translates to the field. And with all the pass catchers you have with the New York Jets right now, I'm not really sure that there's a place for him on that field. So maybe there is in the NFL, but he's not a blocker, and I don't think there's any balls for him to grab in New York right now.
Fair. And, I think Zach Kuntz getting the RAS score of 10, pretty incredible. Yeah. Tyler, what do we got here for these 3 studs?
Sign me up for Kuntz, baby. He's my keep. Started at Penn State, highly touted recruit, and then followed his offensive coordinator to Old Dominion. And really, at this point, I'm just swinging on upside with these guys.
Yeah.
So I'm going to swing for him because of those measurables. I don't know if you guys saw that picture of him standing next to Darnell Washington at the combine, but he was like barely shorter than him and of comparable size. And at one point we were talking about that guy being a first rounder, and now obviously there's a bunch of other details baked into that cake. But I'm gonna sign up for Kuntz there. I'm going to trade Wiley. Just because of my Titans bias, and cut Durham. I don't think there's a lot of opportunity really for either one of them. they're both kind of tied to lackluster offenses for better or worse. I mean, the Titans don't have a lot of passing opportunities, period. I think Chig is obviously going to be the move tight end and probably the second highest target earner on that roster this season. And then, Tampa Bay, are we rolling out Baker Mayfield or are we rolling out freaking Kyle Trask? Like, I'm not excited about either or, because they're just going to, as soon as they see that pass rush coming, they're just going to throw it up to Mike Evans or Chris Godwin and forget about the rest of these guys. So,
yeah, I was pretty shocked that the Bucks, I mean, they didn't trade up to try and get a quarterback, but I was pretty shocked that they, I guess, have enough confidence, or maybe confidence is not the right word. They trust that Baker and Trask will do badly enough in one of the NFL's worst divisions so that they can probably get a better quarterback next year. But still pretty shocked they didn't take a swing at somebody.
Do we have a hashtag yet for people tanking for Caleb Williams? Do we have like a? Because I if I'm Tampa Bay, I think I'm prepared to suck to go get that guy.
Can't for Caleb.
Yeah,
implying you can't win, but then that's if
wait
you have
for
to explain
Williams.
it. That's the whole thing.
I'm struggling here.
What do we got, Jake?
Wait for Williams. Yikes!
I like it. We'll go with that.
Somebody will come up with something.
Oh yeah. Well, taking a big swing, going from day 3 darts, we're actually going to jump back to the first round, which is probably a little more appealing to talk about. How would you guys say the first round affected your rookie draft kind of evaluation? So having a couple of wide receivers towards the tail end, shockingly, 2 running backs pretty damn early, and then only 1 tight end, which I know a lot of our discussions we were trying to figure out, is it going to be 3 or 4 tight ends? So obviously a massive change there. Tyler, how was that changing your evaluations of maybe some of these guys?
Well, I joked about it in our group text, and I'll bring that to the forefront here, is that it at least gave me pause with me sitting at the 102 in our respective draft. I went in being locked in on Bryce Young, but seeing Anthony Richardson go as high as he did was not something I necessarily expected. I mean, it's not like I was going in thinking it was impossible that he would go top 5, but just all the way that we were kind of being led by a lot of the mock drafts and everything to think maybe the Texans aren't taking a quarterback in the top 2 and Indianapolis gets Stroud, somebody who maybe fits what they're looking for. And then Levis even came into the mix there. So it seemed like all the buzz was moving away from Anthony Richardson, and then he ends up going at 4. So I think that was the biggest effect on my round 1 evaluation of these guys going in, was just, I have to at least consider Anthony Richardson a little bit more so than I was before. And the other thing that I wanted to note was just that if I could possibly be any higher on Jahmyr Gibbs, it made me higher on Jahmyr Gibbs, because you can say they went out and got David Montgomery in the offseason. I understand and respect that, but I still think back to a couple drafts ago when I think it was the Jonathan Taylor draft when he got taken in the 2nd round, and I remember saying something ridiculous at the time, I think they really like Marlon Mack, and Jacob said, "Dude, they took Jonathan Taylor in the 2nd round because they're going to play him. You don't take a guy in the 2nd round to not play him." And so extrapolating that forward, I don't care who else Detroit has. They got Jahmyr Gibbs at 12 because they're going to play him. So I'm excited to see what he can do there.
Yeah, that, and obviously sending Swift away for a mere, I think it was a 4th and then a swap of 7ths or something like that. I mean, on a rookie deal that certainly was not too expensive to keep. Jake, what do you think, and how did that mix up or change up your first round evaluation there?
I think the 2 biggest moves I had were JSN, Jackson Smith, and Chigba. I had him at 3 in standard and 5 in Superflex. And I think for now, I'm dropping him to 8 in standard, and then probably, 9, maybe 10 in Superflex. And I think that that landing place in Seattle where you've got Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf is really a challenge. If he went to a place like Green Bay, if they did take him at 14, which they wouldn't normally, or 13, which they obviously haven't done since 2001, but that would have been awesome, and that would have propelled him to as high as number 2 or 3 in Superflex or standard leagues. I don't think that you'd have a hard time convincing people of that. But then when you take a step back and you see the landing place, and he's probably wide receiver 3 for the next year, maybe 2, possibly 3. That's scary, especially when you factor in my second drop, and that's Zach Charbonnet. As much as I love a good Cab Sav or Charbonnet Sauvignon in this case, He was my fourth running back. I had Devin A. Chain at 3, but a lot of people had him at 3 behind Gibbs and Bijan. And I think that was really a challenge for him to also land in Seattle. Like, Pete Carroll must hate fantasy football. You go back to Rashad Penny 4 or 5 years ago, and they already had a kid from Oklahoma State, Chris Carson, who was playing really, really well at the time, well prior to his neck injury. And I think that I really just soured on both of those guys tremendously to the end of the very tail end of the first round. Because of those landings, and it really is deflating, especially when somebody's a Kenneth Walker manager like myself.
Yeah, that was pretty shocking. I at times in the offseason had Charbonnet as the second running back, and that was more so really hoping that he got a great landing spot. He arguably could not have gotten a worse one in the sense of knowing that his ceiling is capped at, I mean, he's hopefully 50-50. I kind of think he won't be, though. And yeah, I mean, with those wide receivers, I felt like JSN, it kind of, certainly once he, ended up doing what he did do at the combine, and then he eventually did the 40, and then it kind of seemed locked in. He's the de facto wide receiver 1. And then you have these guys just go back right at the tail end of the first with, I mean, honestly, I would argue Quentin Johnston possibly getting the best landing spot and frustrating the shit out of everybody. I think that really threw people for a loop. And leading pretty well into that, who would you say is the first, which first-round wide receiver got the worst landing spot? Jake, would you say it is JSN, or do you have somebody else?
Yeah, really quick. You spoke about frustration, and to Tyler's point, like Seattle picked Zach Charbonnet in the second round. He's going to play, and so is Kenneth Walker. And what a lot of what you're seeing in the NFL these days is like a thunder and lightning look, if you will. So I think that's what they're going for, and I think it could work out really well. But it's just in terms of fantasy football players, it is a frustration, like you mentioned. Okay, so on to the receivers. I will tell you, I think you could argue about JSN, which we just talked about, but I will take probably the road less traveled here, and I will tell you that none of the receivers had a poor landing zone. You look at Zay Flowers, who really has no true threat with Rashad Bateman, with the law firm of Bateman and Beckham. With he and Mark Andrews there, I think that's the 1-2 punch you're looking for if you're Lamar Jackson. You look at Quentin Johnston, who probably has the strongest landing of everyone, even though he had 3 yards in the national championship. That's well documented against that vaunted Georgia defense. But and he's a body catcher. But at the same time, Mike Williams is going to be 29 this year, and Keenan Allen 31. So, call it in a year, look out Quentin Johnston with Justin Herbert at the helm. And I think with Addison, you hope and think that he could very well be the next Adam Thielen. And if that's what you're looking at, I'm a like him.
Absolutely, yeah. It was interesting to see where these guys ended up going. I mean, as we got later and later into the draft, you already have 2 running backs go that early. Tight end still would not have gone by then, and just you're wondering when these fantasy relevant players are going to actually get drafted. Tyler, what are you thinking about your worst landing spot for a first round wide receiver?
Yeah, much like Jacob said, I mean, it's you're kind of splitting hairs here because none of them are truly that bad on their face. But if I had to pick one, I'll say Zay Flowers, just because traditionally that offense is not going to air it out. Now, we don't know what that offense is going to look like, not only because these are by far the best weapons that Lamar Jackson has had in his career, but we also have Todd Monken as the OC now. And so we're not talking about the same, potentially not talking about the same kind of setup where we're, giving 15 carries to J.K. Dobbins, another 10 to Gus Edwards, and then peppering in some third down work for freaking Justice Hill or Tyler Beatty. I don't even know if he's still on the team, but I could definitely see what Jacob's saying about, him having a strong path to targets if he beats guys out like Bateman, and it could be him and Mark Andrews, but I'll believe it when I see it in terms of Lamar getting, that a little bit of that higher volume to where when he had someone like Hollywood Brown, you just have these big swings to where you don't know based on the game plan whether he's going to just completely disappear or not. So I'm being picky, but that would be my pick.
Yeah, I think Zay Flowers, he was someone who I was kind of growing on over the draft cycle, or I guess the rookie combine cycle, and thinking he kind of, no one fully reminds me of Steve Smith with the tenacity of someone that's 5'9", 180 pounds, but I feel like at his size, he was a pretty tenacious guy who could play bigger than he truly was. And, I know I think Hollywood was same height. I think he's probably like 20 pounds less than him, but I mean, incredibly electric with the ball in his hands. And I'm hoping that Monken can actually work with spacing these guys out. I don't really care about Duvernay or any of that, but if Flowers and Bateman and obviously OBJ, but with the fragility of OBJ and Bateman, I would like to think basically as long as Zay Flowers doesn't get hurt, I have to believe he gets great opportunity, but people think that, and that's what the Ravens decide to do, is not give great opportunity to these receivers. So who would you say, Tyler, was your most surprising rookie slide? And this could be at any point in the draft. It could be first to second, second to third, anything like that.
If I can have a tie, I'll mention my first guy first, and then I'll let Jacob go and throw in an honorable mention because I don't want to take up two when I'm the first to talk. But Darnell Washington would be my guy just because there was pretty heavy steam for him to go in the first round. I mentioned to you guys that I thought there was going to be 3 tight ends taken in the first round, and I did not think that he was going to be one of them, but I certainly was not going to be shocked if he was. So for him to fall all the way to the third round and then on its face get such a horrible landing spot to a team that already has a tight end that I, not saying I'm over the moon about, but, is definitely a top 10, top 12 tight end in the league in Pat Freiermuth, Project Pat, as we like to call him. It was not only a surprising slide, but a really disappointing landing spot for someone that I think a lot of us were pretty excited to see what he could do.
Mm-hmm. Jake, who you got there? I know you're not nodding along. I'm sure Washington may have been your guy as well, or one of your guys possibly.
So I'm actually going to go with Dwayne McBride, who landed in the 7th round with the Vikings. You're looking at a guy who would just bulldoze people continuously, and I think he was the 2nd or 3rd leading rusher in the country this past year. Tyler, you dropped some cool stats about him at some point with me. Don't feel like you're on the spot to try to share those, but he did have 11 fumbles in his career. And then well documented that he had 5 catches the last 2 seasons. And I also, during the broadcast on Saturday, Todd McShay mentioned that there were some pretty significant off-the-field concerns in terms of maturity. So that I think all of which contributed to the 7th round landing spot. And so a lot of ifs, ands, and buts, but I think Dwayne McBride probably had a 3rd or 4th round grade by a lot of scouts just in terms of his football ability. So, and I was surprised that he landed in the 7th round. And some of the running backs that went in front of him. But when you put it like that, I think that it makes sense. But he's somebody I certainly will target late in dynasty drafts. And then really quickly, I hope I'm not stealing Tyler's thunder here, but the other was Sean Tucker, who I obviously love. And Sean actually had a heart condition that was discovered in the NFL draft process. And then he didn't compete in the combine, but did have his pro day Tuesday prior to the draft beginning on Thursday. Obviously, it wasn't enough. He'd only been working out for a week. So I think that it's actually a really strong landing spot in Tampa Bay when you only have a couple of running backs on the roster in Keyshawn Vaughn and then Arizona State kid. Help me out.
Rashad White.
Rashad White, thank you. I think that guy looks like Tarzan, plays like Jane. We'll find out this fall, but really like that landing place for Sean Tucker. He's somebody that I want to root for.
Yeah, he was an interesting one. With the Bucs, it kind of seemed like a lot of the running back rooms in the NFL, everybody was just on watch. The later we got in the draft, the more we were seeing, some of these backfields not being interrupted. And the fact that so late in the draft, there's the Zach Evans, Dwayne McBride to some degree with the Dalvin Cook uncertainty there. And yeah, specifically with the Bucs, Sean Tucker being an undrafted free agent who, if I did see it correctly, he apparently had gotten the most guaranteed money out of any undrafted free agent, which it has to be somewhat meaningful. It sounds like he was probably reached out to by a number of teams, and he picked the Bucs specifically.
That's a great point.
That's good. That's good to see. And Tyler, you have your bonus, your honorable mention.
Well, what about you? You throw one in there before I take another one.
Well, the easy one for me is Josh Downs because it breaks my heart. Although he didn't have a horrible tumble, I didn't think he was going to be a first-round wide receiver, even as things were developing and they were falling further and further. I didn't really lump him in necessarily with those 4 guys there, but I did assume he was going to get 2nd round, and it wasn't too. I think it was probably halfway through the 3rd. But I'm not too upset considering. My favorite quarterback in the draft, Anthony Richardson, and my favorite wide receiver, not wide receiver 1, but favorite wide receiver in Josh Downs going to the same team. I feel like that's an incredible spot. You have Shane Steichen going there. You have plenty of other weapons around them and at least a competent offensive line. I know it's a bit older and a bit possibly overpaid at this point. But I'm very much looking forward to seeing what Downs can do in the slot because Isaiah McKenzie is not taking his job.
Yeah, I'll sneak in Hendon Hooker. That was my other one. I thought maybe I was going to take that from Jake, but with him again, and much similarly to Darnell, originally, or a lot of steam projecting him in the end of the first round. Even some talk about a team from the second trading back in to lock him down and have that 5th-year option on him. But I think the silver lining for Hendo is a tremendous landing spot. I mean, Jared Goff probably isn't going to be the guy long term in Detroit, and he gets essentially what amounts to a redshirt year, and probably walks into some pretty awesome weapons in year 2 if he's given the reins or gets an opportunity due to injury or something funky like that.
Yeah, because I mean, by the time he, whether it be sometime in this season, even a mop-up duty, or possibly next season, it'd be Jameson Williams is finally back. You have Sam Laporta they spent second-round draft capital on, which I think is very interesting. And, of course, the running back room and everything. So I think
Don't forget about our guy, the sun god, or Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Praise be. The best of the St. Browns. No offense to the other guys. Yeah, and speaking of the Lions, as we did mention it earlier, talking about DeAndre Swift getting traded to Philly for a 4th and swapping 7ths, what does this do to Swift's trade value? And don't worry, this has nothing to do with him being on my Dynasty team in our league. So, Jake, what we got?
Okay,
or Tyler, you're right. Tyler, you got it.
I'm neutral, actually, and that's probably a pretty boring take, but I think he hops from one situation, like not a bad situation to a bad situation, but just kind of meh to another one, because I think quietly, or maybe not so quietly, considering all the praise that has been lauded on one Howie Roseman for his management of draft capital and just contracts in general. I think he's probably the best, if not definitely top 3 GM in the league. He's quietly assembled an amazing running back room for like no money whatsoever. I mean, he got DeAndre Swift on the cheap. He got Rashad Penny on the cheap. He's got Kenny Gainwell still on his rookie contract. And if they decide to keep Boston Scott as well on the roster, I mean, they've got guys that can play. And I just think with all these weapons that they've assembled, there's really no reason to give anybody in this backfield like a true workhorse role. And I don't think that they will. And that we obviously saw him falling out of favor in Detroit to where he was getting between 8 to 12 touches a game. And I think that's probably going to continue more than likely.
Yeah, I mean, he certainly showed, being falling out of favor, injuries, that sort of thing. When he did get the ball, in terms of, fantasy points per game and certainly in PPR, unbelievably efficient. They'd rather give the ball to Jamal Williams, who they know will tout it at a reasonable rate, will score touchdowns, leading, of course, the league in rushing touchdowns last year. Jake, what do you think about DeAndre Swift's dynasty value?
Slight upgrade, but I think we also have to remember that Rashad Penny, the one-legged Rashad, is not he's no slouch. I mean, when he was on the field in Seattle, he was amazing. I mean, he won a lot of people fantasy championships 2 years ago. And I think that he can still be that person. I mean, he's only 25 years old. I think he's going on 26, so not out of his prime just yet. So I think that it's going to be a dual backfield, a shared backfield in Philadelphia. And I think you also have to remember that Jalen Hurts is going to take some of the rushing and receiving away from both of those guys, which is massive. So slight upgrade in terms of the potential. But I don't think that I would give up more than an early second rounder in Superflex and then a late first in Standard. And that's if I was truly competing for this year's championship to get Swift on my roster.
Yeah, I mean, with the Swift trade, really last year, I certainly think that Swift can recreate what Miles Sanders did, and that's not a slight to Miles Sanders, because, I know he basically used his 2022 season as a launch pad to get paid by Carolina, and not faulting him for that by any means, but I think they didn't really have a power element last year in Philly, so the fact that they have Rashad Penny and then Swift and Gainwell do pretty comparable things. Boston Scott is just an all-around guy, and he'll at least play when they play the Giants because he's a giant killer. But, if anything, the offense got even better and even more well-rounded, really at every level. So, yeah, definitely can't fault Howie for just being incredibly savvy with his draft picks he made and the draft picks he traded in this scenario. Maybe jumping over to a little bit older and maybe a little less appealing names, at least in terms of true production nowadays. So we've got veteran running backs Ezekiel Elliott and Leonard Fournette still waiting to find a job, and I'm sure they could probably find one if they wanted it, but maybe being a little more hesitant to maybe find that right spot. So, Jake, start with you. Where do you maybe see these guys slotting in, whether it be a couple of different teams that are possibilities or maybe even specific landing spots if you think there's something good?
Yeah, I think you're right, Chu. I think these guys are going to be very picky, and we probably won't see it until training camp starts this fall about where they sign. I'm still hopeful that Zeke will re-sign with the Cowboys. I've even seen some rumors that Leonard Fournette could do the same. Obviously, sans Zeke. I can't think of specific landing zones, and I think you can actually call out Kareem Hunt there too is similar because Zeke's heading into age 28 season. Kareem Hunt headed into age 28 season. I think Lenny's headed into age 29 season. I think that I read that the Browns thought that Kareem had lost a step, which is never a good sign. Zeke averaged under 4 yards a carry for the first time in 2022, so you feel like the road ahead is a little bleak. And then in terms of to Lenny caught over the 70 balls last year, even though he once again, I think for the third time in his career, averaged less than 4 yards per attempt. So maybe look, these are guys that deserve a place on a roster. But I don't think that they're any more than RB2s at absolute best, no matter where they land, even if it's, call it Zeke or Leonard Fournette in Cincinnati. I don't think that you're looking at a whole lot there.
Yeah, and I think, with their namesake, and certainly they've made plenty of money in their careers, so yeah, they are able to be picky, and once they eventually do sign, while it may not be for a tremendous amount of money, it would only be because they're going to be on a team that's probably top 3 in odds to win the Super Bowl. Tyler, what are you thinking about these guys?
Yeah, I think the couple landing spot, Jacob touched on at the end there at Cincinnati. I think that's a pretty obvious one that I could see one of them landing at, strictly because, one, it's a contender. So you could probably talk one of these guys into taking a cheaper deal and give them a shot at winning a title. So I think that's probably going to be attractive to possibly someone like Zeke, who hasn't had that opportunity, whereas Leonard Fournette has. But and then again, if we're lumping in Kareem Hunt, I'm very interested to see, if he would. We're talking about in these two teams, the Bengals and the Browns, that didn't address the running back position at all in the draft, and I think really should have, because you look at the Browns. Obviously, they have Nick Chubb, but afterwards, it's like Demetric Felton and I can't even remember,
Jerome Ford, the Cincinnati stud.
Yeah, Jerome Ford. So, who knows? Maybe they feel confident in what they have there, but I think that they could also be pretty confident maybe that they're re-signing Kareem Hunt, or that they can get another one of these veterans on the cheap. But I'll throw out another team that I think probably has the cap space and will potentially throw one of these guys a stupid deal because this is kind of a throwaway year and they need to sell tickets, as the Arizona Cardinals. They don't really have. They've got an aging James Conner who has not traditionally been able to hold up to a workload. And so I could see one of these 3 guys maybe getting a little bit of a fat contract down there, considering that, like I said, where everyone's expecting the Cardinals to essentially be one of the worst teams in the NFL this year, with Kyler Murray probably being out, if not for the full year, most of it.
And I think you could even throw in Minnesota in there. If they were to cut Dalvin Cook, which seems to be a lot of the rumors, one of these guys probably ends up landing there. You could say, what's Cam Akers working with other than Zach Evans out in Los Angeles? Go back to Cincinnati. One of these 3 guys would serve really well there. Even Kansas City, obviously they just re-signed Jerick McKinnon today, but they didn't. And I think they also announced they didn't pick up Clyde Edwards-Helaire's option, the 5th-year option. So, are you going to roll with Pacheco from the 7th round a couple years ago? They must be, and I guess they love him, and he was awesome down the stretch last year. It helped win him a Super Bowl, but I think that one of these veterans, and obviously Kansas City signed Melvin Gordon down the stretch, who's got a ring, even though he didn't play. I think he's got a couple rings now. Anyway, I think that these guys are going to your point, land in very prominent positions where teams have a strong probability to win the Super Bowl, and it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and I'll throw one more name out there. They've been known to sign veterans at the running back position in the last couple of years, more so because of necessity, because I don't know of the actual numbers here, but the rate that they've had an injury at the running back position the last couple of years has been nuts is the Ravens. And I mean, if you can have a guy like Kenyon Drake, who I know is not quite the age of these guys we're talking about, but if you can have him or Latavius Murray or any of these middling guys do as well as they have, certainly now that, Lamar is re-signed, so I guess Lamar would have less leverage to be like, do this to make me happy. It's like, well, we already paid you, so we already got you OBJ, we drafted this wide receiver and everything. So I think if, one of those two guys, I could see maybe a Leonard Fournette going there. And yeah, like you said, with Zeke, he doesn't have that ring. So is he maybe inclined to go to the Chiefs if he waits actually during the season? That, again, like you said, it's a very Chiefs move to do with like Melvin Gordon. And yeah, I mean, the Bengals was a funny one. Yeah, the only running back I think that they added was the Canadian Chase Brown, not to be confused with an American Chase Brown, I suppose. And I mean, really, that guy's more of a Samaje Perine replacement than he is a Joe Mixon replacement. But I guess they certainly have enough confidence in the players that they have, including Andre Yasova. Obviously, he's a massive stud, so they'll be okay. Jumping over to vulnerable veterans, and of course it's a shameless plug for the 4-part article I did for vulnerable veterans to be replaced by 2023 rookies. So who do you think, now that we have the draft fallout, the undrafted free agents and all that, who is someone who you think is a vulnerable veteran to be replaced, whether it be this season or by the beginning of next season, by one of these rookies? And Jake, we'll start with you.
Sure. So I will roll with Tyler Lockett, even though he had the second most receptions of his career last year with 81. Yards per catch wasn't quite number 2 in his career, but I think he's going on his age 31 season. And so, wide receivers, start to tail off, even slot guys, speed guys like Tyler Lockett. I don't think by any means is he done. I think that he could have another 70-plus reception year. He could have 2 more of those if he really wanted it. But I think that in terms of getting Jackson Smith and Jigba on the field, I mean, he was the number 1 wide receiver coming out. Let's face it, and he didn't even play in 2022. They're going to get him the ball. I mean, they're obviously going to run it and then run it some more with Walker and Charbonnet. But Gino's got all the weapons in the world that he could ever ask for. And I really do think with DK Metcalf on the outside, I mean, DK is going to be DK for however long he wants to be it. But Jackson Smith and Jigba is going to be a prominent part of that offense. And I think he's going to take a lot of receptions away from, unfortunately, both of those guys. But it's going to be in a way that makes him fantasy relevant. I know I'm kind of talking out of both sides of my mouth because I did drop him down. But I do think that in the next couple of years, he's going to be very special in the league.
Yeah, that is pretty funny that, in the first round, the discussion was maybe the Seahawks are going to take the quarterback to groom behind Gino. And it did the exact opposite by giving him weapons in the first and second rounds. So I think that speaks to the confidence they have in this guy who gave him a 3-year deal. I think it's effectively a 2-year deal. But I mean, he's only 31. And I mean, with these weapons he's got, Seattle's going to be doing pretty well. Tyler, you're a vulnerable veteran.
Well, and Tyler Lockett, the reason he's playing so well is he's still a virgin. So he's quite hungry. But he did finally get engaged this February. So we'll see. I don't know when the happy date is for his nuptials, but man, that guy might go off the rails once he has sex for the first time. So we'll see how that shakes out. But I took one from one of your articles, Chu, and I'm going to go Josh Palmer. I think that one's pretty easy, and it was easy for me, fresh on the top of my mind, because I've been clinging to him with my nails dug in for dynasty value's sake, him being on my roster. But he's one of those guys I'm probably hanging on to for the preseason, and then he's not making the final roster when I go to cut down to our final number when we start the year, because them taking Quentin Johnson as early as they did tells me pretty much all I need to know about how they feel about him. Now I know, Keenan Allen is due to exit stage right anytime now, and Mike Williams is getting a little bit older, but he just got an extension, so they clearly feel comfortable with him. So it's going to be a new era in San Diego pretty soon, and I just don't think that Josh Palmer is going to be a part of it. Or sorry, LA. They'll forever be the San Diego Chargers. But
yeah, I'm in lockstep with you on that one. I mean, when I was doing that article, I was really trying to figure out, aside from the cap situation with, I think Keenan Allen's got like a $20-something million dead cap after the season, and then Mike Williams I think his is about half that, but it's still like 12, 13 million. So, I mean, enough to where you probably still want to hold on to them, and they're still obviously producing when they're healthy. But yeah, I mean, Palmer, they didn't spend tremendous draft capital on him, and it's not like he performed poorly. But I think he did well in spells when he needed to step in, but I don't think he necessarily stepped up when the other two guys were on the field still. And with, what's his name? The former OC for Dallas jumping over to Kellen Moore.
Kellen Moore?
Very, very excited for him to be there in terms of really opening up that offense even more than they had before. But I think that third wide receiver is going to be much more important, and surprises Quentin Johnston, if I'm being honest. But I don't think they would have spent first rounder on him to not have him play in front of Josh Palmer.
Yeah.
Yep.
But jumping to what is the final question, and really jumping back to what we talked about with the first question and talking about these late draft pick players who we can hope make an impact, but really for rookie drafts, they're third, fourth, fifth round dart throws. Who do you have to leave with in rookie drafts? This could be a fourth or fifth round, or who is just someone who's just more of a dart throw towards the end that you want to pick them just because you like them, like their profile, something like that. So Tyler, who you got?
Tyler Scott. Not a lot more to be said, but he's a burner. I think he's like the poor man's Jalen Hyatt. And so I think there's room for him in that offense. I know, like Jacob referenced, it is suddenly a little bit more of a crowded wide receiver room, but I don't think we're expecting anything at this point out of, damn near 30-year-old Velus Jones. And, I think there's Darnell Mooney has underwhelmed. So I think there's just going to be some opportunity there. And I think much like I was very excited about the Lions going into last year and some of their offensive weapons, I'm kind of starting to early get excited about the Chicago Bears and some of their weapons. The arrow is definitely pointing up for that franchise, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think we remember this time last season when it was Tyler. Remember you specifically mentioned it a couple of times. Like, look at the depth chart for Chicago on offense. It's almost like, what the hell are they doing? Like, they don't want this man Justin Fields to succeed, and of course, him rushing for over 1,000 yards really helps. But overall, it's mostly because he was running for his life because didn't really have many weapons to speak of. No offense, Cole Kmet. But Jake, who you got for you're going to leave with rookie drafts?
Yeah, I'll give you two. So in Superflex, Tyler's going to absolutely love this. And by the way, for those that don't know, Tyler's full name is Tyler Scott Daly. That's why he loves Tyler Scott. I won't leave Superflex drafts without Stetson Bennett. That's not. I'm not being sarcastic here, but he's a two-time national champion, and he was drafted in the fourth round by the Rams. So we'll see a fifth, sixth, or seventh rounder for a lot of teams. I mean, Mel Kiper had him in like the 230s, if that tells you anything. So fringe draft. But I think if he's drafted in the fourth round and you're looking at Matthew Stafford, a fellow Georgia Bulldog who's 35, coming up on his age 35 season, he's got a neck issue. A lot of people are asking, why is he coming back? Is it because of the roster bonus? What does he do that makes him want to come back when really the only thing that he has to work with is Cooper Kupp, because they've tried to unload everything they possibly could this past offseason. So, I think that, in terms of what they see in him, they love. I think McVay really loves like the arrogance. I don't care about the drunken stupor in Dallas that he had over the senior week, and I know that he kind of rubbed teams the wrong way at the combine with his interviews. Sean McVay doesn't care about that. And he's 5'11". He weighs about as much as Bryce Young. And he doesn't have a poor arm, and he's athletic. Don't give me the sneaky athleticism that you oftentimes give white quarterbacks. Like, he's just good, and he finds a way to get it done, and I'll find a way to get the Doug Flutie light on my roster. Really quickly on standard leagues, I'm going to talk about Jaden Reed. Again, a very hypocritical comment for me, as much as I talked about how I was out on him earlier. But Packers' second-round wide receivers, they don't take one in the first, but they sure as hell will take one in the second. Jordy Nelson, Christian Watson, Devontae Adams. Sign me up for that every single time with Jaden Reed.
I love it. If we're going to match it, Jake, who do you think he's most like of those former second rounders? There you
All
go.
Three.
Jake, shooting absolute fireballs at the last question with the Stetson Bennett, Jaden Reed. Loving it.
Yeah, love it.
I will end it on A.T. Perry. Of course, I mentioned him earlier. He does have kind of the profile of a Tyrell Williams. It's just a big burner. He did produce pretty well in his final two seasons at Wake Forest. Both seasons over 1,000 yards, over 100 targets. He's got that 4.47 speed. I like what he can do, but I don't necessarily, he has that X size, but he's not necessarily, I think, as physical as what you would hope for someone that's 6'3", 195 pounds. So hoping that he can be kind of a diamond in the rough and not an apples to apples comparison, but a later round guy like Rashid Shaheed who played pretty well in New Orleans last year. I mean, I think if he was an older guy, he was coming in, he's a burner, he's a bit tall, and I think thrived pretty well in a Michael Thomas-less wide receiver room. So Michael Thomas being back, but still be made of glass, I'm hoping an A.T. Perry can step up. And if not, he's a sixth rounder, so, you win some, you lose some. Well, fellas, I appreciate the perspective. And say a little sign-off here. Tyler, you have any a final word, something you took away from, or just a nice quote you want to leave us with? Maybe something Stetson Bennett said?
That's good. No, I just looking at the calendar before we came on, and odds are I won't be on before again. So I'm just going to wish you an early happy birthday, you old bastard.
I appreciate it. Yeah, it's getting up there. Yeah, I mean, my forehead has grown exponentially really in the last year. I wholeheartedly blame Finn. But I appreciate you. And Jake, what do you got over there?
Yeah, I think as our ages go up, the hairline goes back. I think that happens for pretty much everybody. But I will tell you, and I'm going to absolutely butcher this, which is not a great way to finish. But I was telling Tyler, I think over the NFL draft last Thursday, that a player, and I got this from Austin Gale, formerly of PFF, now with the Ringer, but Austin tweeted out that a player that was 5'9" and 180 pounds or less, which I believe Zay Flowers has only made a Pro Bowl one time, and that player made it multiple times, and that was Deshaun Jackson. So if you think about that, what are you really saying about Zay Flowers? And I think Austin was saying that was ever. So, I mean, you mentioned Hollywood Brown, much heavier, and I think even Tavon Austin was taller. So, yes, it's a very specific trait, and I'm a believer in Zay Flowers. Obviously, the Baltimore Ravens are, but that's a pretty tough pill to swallow if you're taking him in the first round, and there's only been one receiver that made a Pro Bowl. And granted, he was really, really good when he was in his prime, but that's a big swing.
So what I'm left with here, Tyler, let me know I'm old as dirt, but I appreciate it. And Jake, let me know that my belief in Zay Flowers is misguided. Breaking my heart, fellas. But no, I sincerely appreciate you coming on, and looking forward to catching up soon. And obviously the group text will be firing off. So see you, fellas.
Much love.